The last wave had torn the forward bulkhead clean off its moorings, and vessel matriarch Eshera could still hear the metal screaming somewhere behind her as she pulled herself out from under the navigation console. Blood her own, thick and amber-warm, ran from a gash above her left eye and pooled in the fur along her muzzle. The bridge lights were gone. Emergency strips along the floor pulsed a dim, sick orange, and through the shattered forward viewport she could see the storm still churning. A wall of superheated plasma and ionized dust 3 light minutes wide, alive with magnetic tendrils that coiled and lashed like the tentacles of something hungry. The Torathi convoy had been 19 ships. She did not know how many were left. "Damage report," she said, and her voice came out wrong, too thin, too steady, the way voices get when the body has already decided the mind cannot afford to break. She wiped amber from her eye with the back of her paw and braced against the tilted deck. No one answered. She turned. The bridge crew of the Catharas grace 7 officers, all of them kin in some fashion, because that was how the Torathi sailed, were scattered across the deck like debris. Sub-Commander Vorin was pinned under a collapsed overhead conduit, his chest still moving but his eyes unfocused, a low groan escaping his throat every time the ship shuddered. Navigator Sulis had managed to strap herself into her chair and was conscious, her silver-furred hands working frantically at a console that sparked and went dark and sparked again. Helm Officer Draven was slumped against the port bulkhead, blood matting the dark fur of his neck. The others were down. "Sulis," Eshera said, "the convoy." Sulis's fingers stopped. She looked up, and in the orange light her eyes were enormous and wet. 7 transponders, she said. 19 launched, 7 still pinging. 12 ships gone. Eshera closed her eyes for 1 breath. 2 breaths. 12 ships meant 1,400 people, families, crushed children, elders, engineers, the whole traveling weight of 5 Torathi clans relocating to their new settlement in the Varenthi Reach. 1,400 people turned to plasma in the space of 40 minutes. The gentle warden, carrying 80 children from the central creche. The Thornspare, the convoy's only dedicated medical vessel, with all their surgical supplies and their best doctors. Gone. Both gone. She opened her eyes and crossed to the communications array, which was a ruin of fused circuits and cracked crystal displays. She pressed her palm against the emergency backup panel, the one they tested once a year, and joked would never be needed, and felt it hum weakly under her touch. "All vessels, this is Vessel Matriarch Eshera aboard the Cathara's Grace. Report your status. I need hull integrity, life support duration, and casualty count. Report now." The silence that followed was the worst sound she had ever heard. Then, one by one, voices came through, broken, static-laced, some of them barely whispers. The Sulvanese dream. Hull breached in 3 compartments, 40 passengers sealed in the aft cargo bay, life support at 11 hours. Captain Dreth's voice was flat and controlled, the voice of a man who had already counted his dead and put the number away. The Crescent of Torath. Engines dead, tumbling on a slow axis. 60 souls aboard, including 22 children from the creche ship that had been destroyed in the first wave. Their lead caretaker, old Mara, reported that the youngest, barely 3 months weaned, was not breathing well. The sound of a child coughing came through behind her words, thin and wet. The Dawn Mother, intact but without navigation, blind and drifting. Her captain, a steady-voiced woman named Relith, reported that she could feel the ship heating on one side and cooling on the other, which meant they were rotating into denser plasma. She estimated 4 hours before the hull plates on the port side began to buckle. The Thornwall, partial engine function, but her reactor shielding was cracked. Radiation was leaking into the lower decks. Her crew had evacuated upward, sealing bulkheads behind them, buying hours at best. 26 people in a bridge designed for 8. The air was already getting thick. The Last Light, a passenger liner carrying 90 elderly Torathi, most of them in medical care. Life support holding, but her doctor reported that the atmospheric recyclers were producing a chemical byproduct acrid, stinging that was irritating the lungs of patients already in respiratory distress. She had lost 2 to cardiac arrest during the initial wave. She did not expect to lose more immediately, but the air quality was deteriorating hour by hour. The Farseeker, a small scout vessel, only 12 crew, but she had sustained the least damage and was attempting to use her maneuvering thrusters to hold position near the crescent, shielding the children's ship from the worst of the plasma surges. Her captain, a young officer named Dorath, reported that the shielding was working, but that every surge cost him fuel he could not replace. The Cathara's Grace, Eshera's own vessel. Primary life support damaged, secondary failing, reactor stable but overheating. 7 bridge crew, 4 conscious. 43 passengers below, status unknown. The internal comm to the lower decks was dead, and the radiation from the cracked shielding made it dangerous to go down and check. 7 ships, 412 survivors out of the 2,300 who had left the Torathi home range 6 days ago. The rest were plasma and memory. Eshera stood at the ruined comm station and let the numbers settle into her bones. She was vessel matriarch, the convoy's highest authority, elected by the clan mothers before departure, responsible for every soul that sailed under Torathi colors. She had chosen this route through the Varenthi shoals because the charts showed it clear. The charts had been wrong. The ionic storm had been building for decades in the dust lanes between the shoals, invisible to standard survey sweeps, and it had swallowed them like prey. Sulis, can we send a distress signal? I can boost the backup array, but the storm is generating so much electromagnetic interference that anything we send will degrade within a few light minutes. No one outside the shoals will hear us. The Galactic Navigation Authority. Their nearest relay buoy is 14 light hours away, on the far side of the storm. The Covenant of Shared Passage. Sulis shook her head. We filed our route with the Covenant before departure. They will not expect us to report in for another 8 days. By then, she stopped. She did not need to finish. By then, they would be dead. Life support across the convoy averaged 9 hours. The Thornwall had less than 6 before radiation reached lethal levels on the upper decks. The Crescent's children were struggling now. The Last Light's elderly were breathing poison. The Dawn Mother was cooking on one side. Eshera looked down at her paws. They were shaking. She pressed them flat against the console and held them there until they stopped. Send the distress signal anyway, she said. Maximum power, all frequencies. Include our position, our numbers, and our remaining life support window. Send it in Torathi, in Galactic Common, and in every language the array carries. Matriarch, no one will. Send it. Sulis sent it. The signal went out into the storm like a voice into a hurricane, and the storm ate it, and nothing came back. Eshera stood at the viewport and watched the plasma coil and lash. She made herself move anyway. There were things a matriarch did even when hope was gone. She crossed the bridge to where Draven lay against the port bulkhead and pressed 2 fingers to the pulse point beneath his jaw. Steady. He was unconscious but stable, the laceration on his neck shallow. She covered him with her own coat and moved to the next officer, and the next, checking each one, doing the small things that could still be done because the large things were beyond her. She activated the internal emergency channel weaker than the external comm, barely functional, but it reached the lower decks. Passengers of the Cathara's Grace, this is Vessel Matriarch Eshera. I know you are frightened. I know you cannot see what is happening. I am here. The bridge crew is here. We have sent a distress signal and we are doing everything we can. Stay together. Keep the children close. And know that your matriarch has not left this bridge and will not leave it. A voice came back, thin, static-chewed, but recognizable. Tessara, the senior passenger representative. Matriarch, the children are asking when it will stop. Eshera swallowed. Tell them soon, she said. Tell them soon. It was a lie. She knew it was a lie. But some lies are kinder than the truth, and a matriarch is allowed that much. The story I am about to tell you is well known among my people now. It has been recorded in the clan archives, taught to children, sung at the festival of returning. But I was there, and the recordings do not capture what it felt like. They cannot. So I will tell it the way I remember it, from inside the bridge of a dying ship, with amber blood in my eye and the taste of burned circuitry on my tongue. This is the story of how the Torathi convoy was saved by the species we had been warned about since childhood. 2 hours after the distress signal, the Thornwall's captain reported that radiation had breached the last sealed bulkhead on the lower deck. His crew had retreated to the bridge level, 26 people in a space designed for 8, shoulder to shoulder, breathing each other's exhaled air. The temperature was climbing. The radiation was not lethal yet, but it would be within 4 hours if they stayed aboard. Eshera ordered the Farseeker, the scout, the least damaged ship, to attempt a crew transfer from the Thornwall. It was an insane maneuver in a plasma storm, matching velocity with a drifting, irradiated vessel, extending a lightweight transfer tube through ionized space, moving 26 people through it one at a time before the tube's shielding failed. Doreth agreed without hesitation. Eshera listened on the comm as Doreth talked his pilot through the approach. His voice was steady, his instructions precise. The pilot, a woman named Tessala, whose hands Eshera imagined shaking the way her own, were matched the Thornwall's drift within 2 meters and locked. The transfer took 41 minutes. 3 times the plasma surged and the tube lost integrity for seconds that felt like hours. The second time, a Thornwall crewman was midway through the tube when the shielding dropped. He made it across with radiation burns on his arms that blistered through his fur. The medic on the Farseeker, their only medic, an engineer's mate who had taken a basic first aid course, wrapped the burns and gave him water and told him he was brave. All 26 made it. The Thornwall, empty now, began to break apart behind them as the radiation ate through her remaining structure. Eshera watched through the viewport as the ship she had known for 20 years, commanded by a man named Gresh who had served under Eshera's mother, came apart silently in the plasma and was gone. 6 ships now, 412 souls, life support still counting down. Eshera opened the fleet channel and told them about the Thornwall. She told them the crew was safe. She told them Doreth had held the line. She did not tell them about the way the ship came apart at the end, the hull plates peeling back like petals in the plasma, the vessel that had been someone's command dissolving into light and vanishing. Some things a matriarch keeps to herself. On the Cathara's Grace, the 43 passengers on the lower decks were starting to ask questions through the internal channel. They could feel the ship shuddering. They could hear the groaning of stressed metal. A child was crying in the background of every transmission, a thin, persistent sound that burrowed into Eshera's skull and would not leave. She answered every question. She lied when she had to. She told the truth when she could. 3 hours in, the Crescent of Torath reported that the children were struggling badly. Old Mara had organized the adults to fan the children with strips torn from clothing and bedding, waving them back and forth to circulate what clean air remained near the floor, where it was slightly better. The youngest ones were listless. The 3-month-old who had been coughing had stopped coughing, which was worse, because it meant he was too weak to try. Eshera ordered every ship to reduce all activity to minimum. No movement that was not essential. No conversations that were not necessary. Breathe slow. Breathe shallow. She said it calmly, the way a matriarch was supposed to, and then she turned away from the comm and pressed her forehead against the cold bulkhead and let her face crumble where no one could see it. Vorin had been freed from the conduit by Sulis and 2 of the conscious crew. His left arm was broken in 2 places, wrapped in emergency splinting, and he sat against the bulkhead with his good hand resting on the deck plating. He was watching her. "They will not come," he said quietly. "You know that." "I know." The Covenant does not patrol the shoals. The Navigation Authority has not updated their charts in 30 years, and no species within range has any obligation to us. I know, Vorin. Then why did you send the signal? She looked at him. His fur was matted with dust and coolant, and his eyes were steady and kind, the way they had been since she was a pup in the creche and he was the older cousin who let her climb on his shoulders and pretended to buckle under her weight. Because it is what a matriarch does, she said. We do not surrender. We signal until the power fails, and then we signal with light. And if the light fails, we signal with silence. Someone may hear, someone may come. And if they do not, then at least the last thing we did was ask. Vorin closed his eyes. The humans, he said. Eshera stiffened. What about them? Their territory is at the edge of the Varenthi Shoals. 6 light towers, maybe 7. If anyone is listening on those frequencies, it would be them. The humans are not our allies. No. The Covenant has classified them as a Category 3 expansionist species. The clan mothers told us to avoid their systems, the navigational advisories. I know what the advisories say. Vorin opened his eyes. But we are dying, Eshera. 412 souls, 22 children, a 3-month-old who has stopped coughing because he is too tired to breathe. If the advisories are right and the humans are dangerous, we are already dead. What more can they do to us? She wanted to argue. The clan mothers had been very clear. Humans were unpredictable, aggressive, prone to excess in all things, and their concept of aid was often indistinguishable from occupation. Better to avoid, better to go around. But going around was what had put them in the shoals in the first place. Our signal is already transmitting on all frequencies, Sulis said from her console. Her voice was very small. If the humans are listening, they have already heard us. 4 hours in, life support on the Sulvanese Dream failed entirely. Eshera listened as Captain Dreth reported the scrubbers had seized and the temperature was climbing. His passengers, 40 souls, mostly elder Torathi who had joined the convoy to resettle closer to their children's families, were huddled in the cargo bay. They were singing. Old songs, the kind the Torathi sang when death was near and you wanted it to find you with dignity. The melody came through the static, thin and wavering, the hymn of the last hearth, which asks the ancestors to leave a light burning so the dead can find their way. She pressed her forehead against the comm panel and listened to them sing and could not speak. Vorin said from his place against the bulkhead, "My grandmother used to sing that. She said it was not a death song. She said it was a song about leaving a light on for someone who is coming home." There was nothing to say to that. Eshera turned back to the viewport and watched the plasma churn. On the Farseeker, Doreth was managing 38 people in a space designed for 12. He had organized them into shifts, one group sitting, one group standing, rotating every 30 minutes so everyone could rest. 2 Thornwall engineers had crawled into the maintenance space and were keeping the air scrubbers alive by mechanical stubbornness, tightening connections and rerouting power with tools meant for hull repair. On the Crescent, old Mara had stopped giving reports. The last thing she had said on the comm was, "I am busy." Eshera understood. When the air was running out and the children were struggling, you did not waste breath on reports. 4.5 hours in. The Cathara's Grace shuddered violently, a secondary plasma surge striking the port hull. Draven slid across the deck. Sulis grabbed her console as her chair rocked. Something deep in the ship groaned, a metallic sound that rose and held and fell away, and the emergency strips flickered twice and went dark for 3 heartbeats before coming back. Eshera checked the reactor readings. Temperature up again. The overheating was accelerating. 5 hours. The Lastlight's doctor reported that 3 of her elderly patients had lost consciousness from the recycler byproduct. She had improvised a filter using cargo netting, medical gauze, and a piece of her own uniform, and it was helping, but it would not last another 2 hours. 5.5 hours. Captain Relith on the Dawn Mother reported that hull temperature on the port side had reached the stress threshold. The plates were groaning. She had moved all 60 of her passengers to starboard and sealed the port compartments, but the heat was spreading through the frame. 6 hours. The Farseeker reported their own life support showing dangerous strain. Dorath's voice was still controlled, but Eshera could hear the thinness in it, the careful rationing of breath that meant the air was getting bad. At 6 hours and 14 minutes, something changed. Sulis made a sound, not a word, not a name, just a sharp intake of breath that cut through the bridge like a blade. Eshera turned. "A signal," Sulis whispered. "Coming through the storm, it is cutting through the interference." That should not be possible. The electromagnetic density in this region would degrade any standard transmission within. "What does it say?" Sulis pressed a control. A voice filled the bridge comm, clipped, speaking Galactic Common with an accent Eshera had never heard. The accent turned the consonants flat and hard, and the vowels were tight, and there was no urgency in it at all. It sounded like someone reading a cargo manifest. "Torathi Convoy, this is the United Earth Naval Ship Resolute Horizon, designation FFG 2214, responding to your distress beacon on emergency frequency 772. We have your position and your passenger count. We are inbound. Estimated arrival, 41 minutes. Please maintain your current positions and conserve life support. We are bringing air, medical teams, structural engineers, and tow capacity. Confirm receipt." Eshera stared at the comm. The voice had already stopped, but it hung in the air like the last vibration of a bell. Vorin was looking at her. Sulis had turned in her chair. Neither spoke. "Confirm receipt," Eshera said. Her voice cracked on the second word. She steadied it. "Torathi Convoy to Resolute Horizon. Receipt confirmed. We have 6 vessels, 412 survivors, multiple hull breaches, failing life support across all ships, and radiation contamination on 2 vessels. Our most critical need is the Crescent of Torath, 22 children, atmosphere failing. We are." She paused. The word she wanted was inadequate. She said it anyway. "Grateful." It came out like a confession. 18 minutes later, a second signal arrived. Different voice, same flat calm. "Torathi Convoy, this is the UENS Broad Mercy, hospital ship HSP 41, accompanying the Resolute Horizon. We are carrying full surgical suites, atmospheric restoration modules, and pediatric critical care capability. Please identify any vessels with juvenile passengers so we can prioritize boarding. Also, how do your young prefer their ambient temperature? We would like to have the recovery bays set before we dock." Eshera heard the message and did not immediately understand it. She played it back. She played it back again. They were asking about the temperature the children preferred. A hospital ship was coming through a lethal ionic storm, and before it arrived, the crew wanted to know what temperature to set the rooms to so the children would be comfortable when they got there. "Tell them 31 standard degrees," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "Our young prefer 31, and tell the Crescent of Torath, tell old Mara, tell her help is coming for her children." 14 minutes after that, a third signal. "Torathi Convoy, UENS Supply Train Kessler Ridge, Logistics Tender LT 1106. We are carrying replacement atmospheric scrubbers compatible with Covenant standard hull fittings, portable fusion cells, radiation containment kits, 600 thermal blankets, water purification units, and enough ration packs for 800 for 30 days. We understand you are Torathi mammalian, omnivore flexible, correct? We have protein-adjusted rations ready. Also, our galley crew has been working on adapting some recipes. We have never cooked for Torathi before, so we apologize in advance if the seasoning is off. Please let us know about any dietary restrictions or allergies." Eshera sat down in the matriarch's chair, which was cracked down the middle and listing to one side. She put her face in her paws and breathed. Behind her, Sulis was crying silently. Vorin had his eyes closed and his good hand pressed flat against the deck, his lips moving in the old Torathi prayer for deliverance, the one you recite when something happens that is larger than anything language was built to hold. They had sent a distress signal into a storm, expecting nothing, prepared to die singing. And the humans had answered with a warship, a hospital ship, and a supply tender whose galley crew was worried about seasoning. 7 ships, 412 Torathi, all watching through whatever viewports still functioned as the storm parted. Not naturally, not a lull in the plasma currents, forced open by something moving through it at speeds that should have been impossible in that density. The Resolute Horizon came first. She was a frigate. Eshera learned that word later, along with the human ranking system that placed it far below their largest vessels, and she was not beautiful. She was blunt and angular and scarred along her port hull from some previous engagement, and her running lights cut through the plasma like surgical instruments. She came through the storm the way a blade comes through cloth, and the electromagnetic interference that had swallowed every Torathi signal simply bent around her hull like water around a stone. She was broadcasting on all frequencies, a steady, calm hail, repeating her position and time of arrival, giving the convoy something to hold on to. Eshera relayed it to every ship, and on every ship the Torathi who heard it, the elders singing death hymns, the caretaker fanning children, the captain watching her hull buckle, the doctor filtering air through her own torn clothing. They all stopped what they were doing, and they listened. Behind the Resolute Horizon came the Broad Mercy. The hospital ship was 3 times the frigate's size, white-hulled where the frigate was gray, with red markings along her flanks that Eshera would later learn designated medical neutrality. She moved through the storm as if the storm were an inconvenience. Behind the Broad Mercy came the Kessler Ridge, blocky and ungainly and bristling with cargo arms and docking clamps. And behind the Kessler Ridge came 3 more ships, escorts, corvettes. Small, fast, armed, running a perimeter pattern around the hospital ship and the supply tender with the focused alertness of guard animals protecting their young. 6 ships. They had sent 6 ships into a lethal ionic storm for a convoy of strangers they had never met, never traded with, never been obligated to by any clause in any treaty anywhere in the galaxy. Eshera watched them come and felt her legs weaken. She gripped the arm of her chair and steadied herself. On the comm, she could hear the other Torathi captains reacting. Captain Dreth on the Sulvanese Dream said nothing for a long time and then, very quietly, said, "Matriarch." "Are those real?" Captain Relith on the Dawnmother, blind until 30 seconds ago, reported that her passengers had crowded to the starboard viewports and were pressing their hands against the glass. On the Farseeker, someone was laughing, not a joyful laugh, but the ragged, disbelieving sound a person makes when the impossible happens and the body does not know how to process it. On the crescent of Torath, old Mara's voice came through the comm for the first time in 2 hours. She said one word, "Coming," then nothing else. But Eshera heard the sound behind the word, children stirring, adults murmuring, the whole ship shifting from the silence of people waiting to die to the noise of people realizing they might not have to. The Resolute Horizon matched velocity with the Cathara's grace and extended a docking collar. Eshera watched through the shattered viewport as the frigate maneuvered with a precision that seemed impossible for a vessel of that size. No hesitation, no correction, just a smooth, confident approach that ended with the collar sealing against the Grace's airlock with a sound like a heartbeat. "Matriarch," a voice said on the comm, younger female with something warm in it. "This is Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, boarding team leader. We are coming aboard. My team includes 2 structural engineers, a damage control specialist, a radiation containment technician, and 3 medical technicians. We are bringing portable atmosphere units that will give you clean air within 4 minutes of deployment. Permission to board." "Granted," Eshera whispered. The airlock cycled. Eshera stood, because a matriarch stands when someone enters her bridge, and she straightened her torn tunic and wiped the dried blood from her muzzle and tried to look like someone who deserved the title she carried. The humans came through in a file, and this was the thing no advisory or clan mother warning had prepared her for. They were calm, not aggressive, not wary, not calculating advantage. Calm the way deep water is calm, the kind of calm that comes from having done this before, from knowing exactly what needs to happen and in what order and how fast. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez was the last through. She was shorter than Eshera. Humans were smaller than Torathi, which the advisories had never mentioned, with dark hair pulled back tight, and eyes that scanned the bridge the way a surgeon scans a patient, assessing damage, not passing judgment. She carried a hard-sided case in one hand and a tablet in the other, and she looked at Eshera and said, "Vessel Matriarch, I am Rachel. We have got you. Show me the worst first." Not "we have come to help," not "you are under our protection now," not any of the phrases the advisories had warned about. "We have got you." Vasquez looked around the bridge, the shattered viewport, the collapsed conduit, the unconscious crew, the amber blood on the console, and her expression did not change. She had walked into disaster and registered it the way a carpenter registers a broken chair. This is what needs fixing. "How many on this vessel?" she asked. 50, 7 bridge crew, 43 passengers on the lower decks. The internal comm is intermittent. "We will get to them." Vasquez spoke into her comm. "Alvarez, add reactor assessment to your list. Cracked shielding, radiation leak, lower deck access blocked. I want a pathway cleared within 45 minutes. A voice came back, male, laconic. "Copy on it." She turned to Eshera. "Matriarch, I am going to ask you a question that may seem strange. Is there anything aboard this ship, any cultural practice, any restricted area, any religious or personal space that my team should not enter without permission? We will go everywhere we need to go to keep your people alive, but we would prefer to do it respectfully." Eshera stared at her. In her entire career, no one from another species had ever asked her that. Not once. "No," she said, "there is nothing you may not enter, save my people." "Yes, ma'am." She showed Vasquez the worst. Voron's broken arm, the unconscious crew, the failing life support, the cracked reactor shielding leaking radiation into the lower decks where 43 passengers waited behind degrading bulkheads. Vasquez listened, nodded once at each item, and spoke into her comm in short, precise sentences. "Tours, portside atmospheric unit, bridge first, then work aft to the passenger section. Kimura, radiation containment on the reactor shielding full seal, not a patch. I want 0 leakage within 30 minutes. Chen, medical triage, start with the sub-commander, compound fractures left arm, possible internal, scan him first. Alvarez, get down to the lower decks as soon as Kimura clears the radiation path. 43 passengers, unknown status. They have been down there for 6 hours. Move." They moved. They moved the way the Torathi fleet drilled, fast, efficient, no wasted motion. But there was something else in the way they moved. There was kindness in it. Not performed kindness, not the theatrical concern diplomats displayed. Real kindness, the kind that lives in the hands. Eshera watched a human woman, Chen, the lead medic, kneel beside Voron, scan his arm with a device the size of her palm, and say quietly, "Sir, I am going to set this properly and give you something for the pain. It will feel cold first, then warm. You are going to be fine." Voron looked up at her. His eyes were wet. He said nothing. The human smiled, small, professional, warm, and went to work. Her hands were steady and sure, and she talked to him the whole time, telling him what she was doing and why, as if he were a colleague and not a stranger from a species she had never touched before. Within 4 minutes, the portable atmospheric unit was running. The bridge air went from thin and acrid to clean and cool in a single breath. Eshera inhaled and felt something unlock in her chest that had been clenched for 6 hours. a tightness she had not even known was there until it released. On the lower decks, Alvarez reached the passenger compartment within 20 minutes, all 43 alive, dehydrated, frightened, but uninjured. The bulkheads had held. Eshra leaned against the comm station and closed her eyes and breathed. Simultaneously, across the convoy, the other human ships were deploying. On the crescent of Torath, a boarding team from the Broad Mercy reached the children. The team leader, a man named Akafer, reported the pediatric recovery bay was set to 31 degrees and ready. He asked whether the Torathi children would be frightened by the medical scanner lights, because if so, his team could switch to passive monitoring. "They will be frightened of everything," Eshra said. "They have been breathing poorly for hours and they are very young. They will cry." "Understood. We have personnel trained in pediatric distress management. We will keep it quiet and warm. Matriarch, we have also got something called stuffed animals, small soft toys. They are human children's comfort objects. We carry them on the Mercy for situations like this. Would it be appropriate to offer them to your young?" Eshra opened her mouth and could not speak. She closed it. She breathed. "Yes," she managed. "That would be yes." Old Mara, who had been fanning children with torn cloth for 4 hours, who had watched the 3-month-old stop coughing, who had held the smallest ones against her chest and breathed her own air into their mouths to keep them going, Old Mara handed the children one by one to the human medics and watched them carried into the hospital ship. When Akafer offered her his arm to help her across the docking collar, she took it, and she did not let go for a long time. On the Sulvany's Dream, where the elders had been singing death hymns 2 hours ago, a team from the Kessler Ridge restored atmospheric scrubbing and delivered thermal blankets. Captain Dreth reported that the human engineers had not only replaced the failed scrubbers, but upgraded the entire power coupling to a system that would last 10 times longer. When he asked why, the lead engineer, a heavyset man named Petrov, shrugged and said, "It is what we had in stock. No point installing something that will break again." On the Dawnmother, blind and drifting and heading towards structural failure, a corvette matched her tumble and hard dock to her hull. A navigation team physically wired a human guidance system into the Torathi bridge. Captain Relith reported, with undisguised amazement, that the navigators had brought an adapter kit pre-configured for Covenant standard interfaces, as if they had prepared for exactly this scenario, as if they carried these things routinely, as if saving strangers were something they did often enough to have packed for it. On the last light, where the elderly patients had been breathing filtered poison, a medical team from the Broad Mercy installed a proper atmospheric filtration unit and administered treatment to the 3 who had lost consciousness. All 3 were stabilized within 20 minutes. The ship's doctor, who had been improvising with cargo netting and gauze for 5 hours, who had watched 2 patients die and been powerless to stop it, sat down on the deck and wept. A human nurse sat down beside her and put an arm around her shoulders and said nothing and waited. On the Farseeker, crammed with 38 people, a crew from the Kessler Ridge offloaded the Thornwall survivors onto the supply tender. Dorath was the last to leave his ship. He crossed to the Kessler Ridge and was handed a mug of something warm by a human cook who said, "You look like you could use this." Dorath later told Eshra it was the best thing he had ever tasted, and that the human word for it was cocoa. On the Cathara's Grace, Kimura sealed the reactor shielding in 22 minutes, 8 minutes ahead of the timeline Vasquez had set. The radiation dropped to 0. Alvarez opened the lower deck bulkheads one by one, checking each section before waving the passengers through, and the 43 Torathi who had spent 6 hours sealed in a compartment with failing air and the sound of their ship groaning around them, climbed up to the bridge level and blinked in the restored lights. Tessara, the passenger representative, was the first through. She saw Eshra and crossed to her and gripped her arm, a Torathi gesture of shared survival, the kind you give someone who has kept you alive through a night you did not expect to see the end of. She did not speak. Neither did Eshira. They stood together for a moment, and then Tessara turned and looked at the humans working on the bridge, and her ears went flat against her skull, which in Torathi body language is not fear but deep, involuntary respect. "Who are they?" she asked. "They are the ones who came," Eshira said. Chen's team triaged each passenger, checking hydration, respiration, radiation exposure, minor injuries. A human medic named Santiago found a young Torathi mother holding an infant who had been born 3 weeks before the convoy launched. The infant was dehydrated but otherwise healthy. Santiago administered fluids, wrapped the child in a human thermal blanket, and showed the mother how to use the blanket's self-heating function. The mother looked at Santiago, at the blanket, at her child warm and quiet in her arms, and said something in old Torathi dialect that Eshira did not catch. But the expression on her face needed no translation. Vasquez was on the bridge, working alongside Sulis to restore full convoy communications. Eshira watched her and tried to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she had been taught. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of an alien bridge, shoulder to shoulder with a Torathi navigator, patiently explaining how to reroute emergency communications through the human relay so every surviving Torathi vessel could talk to every other in real time. "Matriarch," Vasquez said, looking up, "your comm architecture is elegant, crystal resonance-based. We do not see that often." "Beautiful work." Eshira blinked. "Thank you. Once this relay is established, you will have full fleet communications through our system for as long as you need it. No charge, no strings, no reciprocity clause. Your signal, your channels, your encryption. We are just providing the power." Eshira watched all of this, the medics, the engineers, the navigators, the woman on her bridge floor explaining crystal resonance comm architecture, and she thought about the advisories. Category 3 expansionist species, prone to excess. Concept of aid indistinguishable from occupation. She thought about the clan mothers who had warned her. She thought about the Covenant classification system that had labeled these people as a threat. And she thought, they are right about one thing. The humans are prone to excess. They are excessive in their generosity. They are excessive in their competence. They are excessive in their refusal to let strangers die when they have the means to prevent it. If that is a threat, then it is the kind of threat the galaxy needs more of. 12 hours after the human ships arrived, the convoy was stable. Life support restored on all 6 Torathi vessels. Hull breaches sealed. Radiation contained. The Dawn Mother could see again. The Last Light's patients were breathing clean air. The children from the Crescent of Torath were asleep in the Broad Mercy's pediatric bay at 31 degrees, each one holding a small stuffed animal made of fabric and stuffing. The 3-month-old who had stopped coughing was breathing easily now, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that old Mara watched from a chair beside his bed, unable to look away, as if the act of watching him breathe was itself a prayer answered. The ship's pediatric specialist, a young woman named Park, was reading from a tablet in a low voice, a human children's story translated in real time into Torathi, so the children who woke would hear something familiar. Voran's arm had been properly set and was healing in a regeneration sleeve the medics said he could keep. The elders on the Solvani's dream had been fed actual hot food, prepared by the Kessler Ridge's galley crew, who had spent the transit through the storm researching Torathi cuisine. Captain Dreth reported that the elder who had been leading the death hymns was now leading a gratitude song and had asked the human cook for the recipe. Eshira stood on the bridge, looking out through the viewport. The resolute horizon was holding position between the convoy and the densest part of the plasma front, her scarred hull taking the full electromagnetic lashing so the Torathi ships behind her would not have to. The corvettes had spread into a wider perimeter. The Broad Mercy was docked to the crescent, and through the collar, Eshira could see movement human medics going back and forth, checking patients, bringing warm drinks. Vasquez had been on the bridge for 9 hours without rest. She was standing now, reviewing a damage assessment, and looked up when Eshera approached. Matriarch, the tow configuration is set. When you are ready, we will take the convoy out of the shoals. The Resolute Horizon will clear the path, the corvettes will flank, and the Broad Mercy and Kessler Ridge will tow the vessels that cannot make way under their own power. 14 hours to clear space. From there, we can escort you to the nearest Covenant Way station, or to Torathi space. Whatever you need. Lieutenant Commander, Eshera said. Why? Vasquez tilted her head. Why what, Matriarch? Why did you come? We are strangers. The Torathi have no treaty with Earth, no trade agreement, no diplomatic relationship. Your government has no obligation to us. And yet you sent 6 ships into an ionic storm that was actively trying to destroy anything that moved through it. You sent a warship, a hospital ship, a supply tender, 3 escorts, medical teams, engineers, radiation technicians, food, blankets, children's toys. You sent a pediatric specialist who learned our language during the transit so she could read stories to our young. Why? Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because you called. That is not an answer. It is the only one we have. She put her tablet down. Matriarch, we heard a distress signal. We had ships in range. The math was simple. People were dying, we could help, so we came. There is no clause for that, no treaty required. It is just what you do. Eshera stared at her. In 70 years, she had dealt with 14 species across 3 galactic sectors. Every interaction was transactional. Every rescue had a price, a tariff, a concession, a political debt called in later at the worst possible moment. And this woman was telling her that 6 ships had entered a lethal storm because a stranger's voice had come through the static and said, please. The Covenant will ask what you want in return, Eshera said. They can ask. And your answer? Vasquez almost smiled. Same as always, nothing. We pulled people out of a storm, that is the report. Responded to distress signal, rendered aid, escorted convoy to safety. End of file. Something shifted inside Eshera. Not a thought, not a decision. Something older and deeper, at the level of bone and blood and the oldest Torathi instincts. The ones that predated language, that knew the difference between a predator and a protector. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to Rachel Vasquez's shoulder, the Torathi gesture of absolute trust, given only to clan, only to those who had proven themselves beyond question. Vasquez went still. Then slowly, she raised one hand and placed it on Eshera's back between her shoulder blades and held it there. She did not speak. The gesture translated perfectly. The convoy reached clear space 14 hours later, exactly as predicted. The Resolute Horizon cut a channel through the storm's trailing edge, her hull absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any Torathi vessel. The corvettes held the flanks. The Broad Mercy towed the Crescent of Toreth and the Sulvanese Dream. The Kessler Ridge towed the Dawnmother. The Cathara's Grace, barely functional, was lashed to the Resolute Horizon's port side and carried like a child in a parent's arms. During the 14-hour transit, the human crews never stopped working. On the Cathara's Grace, Tors and Kimura ran a full structural assessment of every deck, patching microfractures in the hull that Eshera had not known existed. They found 17 stress points that would have failed within days, any one of which could have been fatal in open space. They repaired all 17 without asking for authorization or payment. The Resolute Horizon took the brunt of everything the storm threw during the transit. Captain Calloway kept his frigate between the convoy and the densest plasma curtains, using his ship's superior shielding as a windbreak. Eshera could see the frigate's hull lighting up with each surge blue-white arcs of electromagnetic discharge crawling across the armored plates, and the ship never flinched. She held her position. She took the punishment. And on the convoy channel, the only communication from the Resolute Horizon during the entire 14 hours was a periodic laconic status update. Convoy on track, all vessels nominal, ETA to clear space, 12 hours, 10 hours, 8 hours. As if escorting 400 strangers through a plasma hell were a commute. On the broad Mercy, the children began to wake. Park sat with each one as they opened their eyes, spoke to them in their own language, showed them the stuffed animals, and answered their questions with a patience that old Mara watched with something close to reverence. One child, a girl of about 4, named Celis, asked Park if the storm was gone. Park told her it was. Celis asked if it would come back. Park said, "Not while we are here." Celis considered this for a moment, then held up her stuffed animal and said, "His name is Warm." Park smiled and said, "That is a very good name." On the Kessler Ridge, the galley crew had set up a feeding rotation for the convoy. Meals were prepared and sent across the docking collars to each vessel, hot food, carefully adjusted for Torathi requirements. Petrov had prepared a grain and protein dish that he told Captain Dreth was his mother's recipe, adapted for Torathi palates. Dreth ate it, paused, and said, "Tell your mother she is an excellent cook." Petrov grinned and said, "She knows." When they broke clear, and the storm fell away behind them, and the stars returned clean, steady, silent stars, not the screaming plasma they had lived in for 20 hours, 412, Torathi looked out through their viewports and saw open space. Some wept, some prayed. On the Sulvanese Dream, the elders sang not death hymns this time, but the song of returning, which the Torathi sing when they have been lost and find their way home. On the Crescent, the children were asleep in the broad Mercy's Bay, warm and breathing easily, clutching their stuffed animals, and Park was still there, still reading, still translating human stories into Torathi lullabies. The Resolute Horizon's captain, a man named Calloway, whom Eshera had never spoken to directly, who had commanded the entire rescue from his bridge without fanfare, sent a single message. "Torathi convoy, this is Captain Calloway, UENS Resolute Horizon. You are clear of the storm. All 6 vessels and 412 souls accounted for. We will escort you to the Covenant Way station at Tellery Point 18 hours from here. Get some rest. You have earned it. You have earned it, not we have earned it, not you are welcome, not remember this." As if the surviving had been the hard part, and the rescue had merely been the obvious thing to do. At the way station, the handover was efficient and quiet. The Covenant officials were startled. They had not known the convoy was in distress, and their protocols required extensive documentation before rendering aid. Eshera watched the Covenant station master spend 40 minutes asking Vasquez to fill out reciprocity forms. Vasquez filled them out without complaint, writing NA in every box that asked what Earth wanted in return, and signed at the bottom with a practiced hand. Eshera stood beside Vasquez during the paperwork and watched the Covenant station master grow, increasingly flustered by the NA entries. "Surely there is some form of compensation," the station master said. "Resource exchange, transit rights, diplomatic consideration." "No," Vasquez said. "But the expenditure of fuel alone for 6 vessels through an ionic storm. We budget for it." The station master looked at Eshera as if expecting her to explain. Eshera looked back at him and said, "They came because we called. I do not understand it either, but I have stopped trying to make it fit into a form." When the human ships departed, they did it without ceremony. No farewell address. No diplomatic function. The Resolute Horizon detached the Cathara's grace gently, the way you set down something fragile, and the boarding teams returned and they left. Vasquez was the last to cross back through the airlock. She paused in the collar and turned to Eshera. "Matriarch. Safe travels." "Lieutenant Commander," Eshera's throat was tight, "I intend to speak to the clan mothers about the advisories, about your people." "Speak however you want. We will be out here either way." And then she was gone, and the airlock sealed, and the 6 human ships pulled away and did not look back, and the storm behind them was already fading into the static of ordinary space. That was 23 years ago. The advisories have been revised. The Torathi Compact no longer classifies humans as a Category 3 threat. We classify them as something the Covenant system does not have a category for, because the system was not built to accommodate a species that enters lethal storms to save strangers and then fills out the paperwork saying they want nothing. The children from the Crescent of Torath are grown now. Several serve in the Torathi fleet. One of them, a young captain named Celes, who was 4 years old when Park read her human stories in translated Torathi, commands her own vessel and keeps a small stuffed animal on her bridge console. When asked about it, she says it was a gift from a human who read to her when she was dying. She is not being dramatic. She was dying. They all were. The 3-month-old who stopped coughing the one old Mara held against her chest and breathed her own air into his name is Tevel. He is an engineer now, working on atmospheric systems, and his specialty is emergency life support design. He has never spoken publicly about his rescue. He does not need to. His career speaks for him. 3 years after the rescue, a Covenant survey fleet entered the Varenthi Shoals and confirmed what Eshera had suspected. The storm had been building for decades, and the Covenant's charts had not been updated since the initial survey. 47 other convoys had been routed through those shoals over the preceding years. None had encountered the storm because none had taken the exact route the Torathi chose. The Covenant had not known, but they also had not checked. The humans had not needed to know. They heard a signal and came. The Torathi Compact sent a formal letter of gratitude to the United Earth government. The response came back 3 weeks later, signed by someone in the Naval Operations Division, and it said, "You are welcome. We were glad to help. If you need anything else, this frequency is always monitored." There was no mention of reciprocity, no mention of trade negotiations, no mention of political leverage, just a frequency and a standing offer. Eshera had the frequency encoded into every Torathi navigation system built after that year. It is still there. Every Torathi ship that launches carries a small piece of Earth in its comm array, a frequency that says, "If you are in trouble, call this, and someone will come." The Covenant revised its emergency response protocols the following year. They did this not because of political pressure, not because of speeches or ultimatums, but because the humans had embarrassed them simply by being faster. The Covenant took 8 days to notice the Torathi were missing. The humans took 6 hours to arrive. That gap shamed the Covenant into building a real-time distress monitoring network, the first in galactic history, modeled, though they would never publicly admit it, on the human system that had detected the Torathi signal in the first place. Old Mara lived another 12 years after the rescue. She spent them at the central creche in the Varenthi settlement, caring for the next generation of Torathi young, and she kept a photograph of Akafor on the wall of her office. When children asked who the human in the picture was, she told them, "He is the man who carried you home." It did not matter that the children she was speaking to had not been on the Crescent. Mara believed that every child was carried home by someone, and that the debt of gratitude extended forward as well as back. Doreth, Captain Doreth now, promoted after the rescue for his handling of the Thornwall transfer, went on to command the Torathi Compact's first dedicated search and rescue vessel. He named her the Farseeker II. When asked why he had chosen search and rescue as his career, he said, "Because a human handed me a cup of cocoa when I had been rationing air for 6 hours, and it was the most important thing anyone has ever done for me. I want to be the cup of cocoa for someone else." The quote became famous among the Torathi. It is not elegant, it is not poetic, but it is true, and the Torathi value truth above poetry. Tessala, the pilot who matched the Thornwall's drift and held the transfer tube through 3 plasma surges, serves as Doreth's executive officer on the Farseeker II. She has never spoken about the burns the Thornwall crewmen sustained during the second surge. But she carries a small radiation badge on her uniform collar, not a Torathi tradition, a human one that the crewman gave her after his arms healed. He said it was to remind her that she had held steady when the universe told her to let go. Vorin passed away 7 years ago, at home, surrounded by his family, with full use of both arms thanks to the regeneration sleeve Chen placed on his skin on the floor of a ruined bridge. In his will, he asked that a human phrase be carved on his memorial stone. None of us recognized it. It was in Earth English, not Galactic Common, and we had to contact the human embassy for a translation. The phrase was, "Fair winds and following seas." The humans told us it is an old blessing, from a time when their people sailed on water instead of stars. It means, "May your journey be safe, and may the currents carry you home." Vorin had never sailed on water. Neither have I, but I understand the blessing, because I have been in a storm, and I have been carried home, and the people who carried me asked for nothing except to know that I arrived. My name is Eshira. I am retired vessel matriarch of the Torathi Compact, living quietly in the hills above the Northern Sea. I keep a model of the resolute horizon on my desk, not precise, because I built it from memory, and my memory of those hours is colored by blood and fear and gratitude, and something I still do not have a word for in my language. But I think the humans have a word for it. They call it grace. I have lived long enough to know that the galaxy is full of species that calculate that bargain, that weigh the cost of kindness against the price of silence. The humans do not calculate. They hear a call, and they come. They bring warships and hospital ships and supply tenders and blankets and children's toys and recipes they researched during the transit. They set the room temperature before they arrive. They read stories to dying children in a language they learned on the way. They hand a man with burned arms a cup of cocoa and say, "You look like you could use this." And when it is done, they write NA on the reciprocity forms and go home. If that is grace, then I have been its witness, and I will spend what remains of my life making sure the record says so.